Today's episode of Stupid Things Atheists Say is going to be, you can't prove a negative. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So to begin, few quick disclaimers. First off, not all atheists are idiots or stupid. If you want to see a atheist who is neither of those things, check out Zarathustra's Serpent on YouTube. He's a smart guy who says interesting things. Not for any given stupid thing I've heard from a lot of atheists, I don't mean that all atheists say it. Obviously, you're not going to find any real uniformity, generally speaking, so I'm not saying anything like that. Okay, that out of the way. You can't prove a negative. Well, yeah, you can. I mean, the first and most obvious thing is there are tons of negatives that you can prove. For example, here, I'll prove that there's no biggest prime number. Suppose there is a biggest prime number. Call it n. Multiply that by all the prime numbers smaller than it. Take that product, add 1. That number is not divisible by any of the prime numbers up to and including n, the biggest prime number. And so either it is itself prime, or it is has a prime factor which is larger, which is not on that list, and therefore has to be larger than the biggest prime number that you assumed n. Therefore, there is no biggest prime number. Proof by contradiction. Okay, hey look, I proved the negative. Or again, I can prove there's no adult blue whale in this room. This room isn't big enough to fit an adult blue whale, so an adult blue whale cannot be in this room. There you go. I've just proved the negative. Alternatively, I can prove that there is no blue whale, but I'd see it if it were here, because it's the sort of thing that reflects light, etc., etc., and I don't see it here. And it couldn't possibly hide anywhere because the room's not big enough. Again, I have proved a negative. Proving negatives happens all the time. There's actually another problem I'm going to get to, which is that a double negative it's introduced by the fact that double negative is a positive. So if it is not the case that nothing is here, it's the same thing as there is something here. So if you prove the positive there is something here, you are also proving the negative that there is not nothing here. Now, this usually is more helpful if you, instead of saying it's not the case that there's nothing, or it is not the case that there is not something here, if you come up with a different name for that not something rather. So if you have a name for a thing and its contradiction, so for example, something and nothing. So if you prove that there is something, you have proved that there is not nothing. And so you have proved a negative. That sort of thing happens again all the time. Basically, anytime you prove any kind of positive, you are always proving the negation of its antithesis. So pretty much any proof intrinsically proves negatives. Now, what do people actually mean when they say you can't prove a negative in this case? Because there is an actual meaning. At least some of the people involved sort of vaguely intuit on some level. Because usually, in my experience, they can't actually explain it. So here, I'll explain it for them. And that is that you cannot prove the universal non-existence of a localized particular. So, for example, I can't prove that there is not a Bigfoot somewhere in the universe. And that's for the simple reason I do not have access to all the places a Bigfoot could potentially be. By the way, it would have to be a possible localized particular, because obviously you could still prove the non-existence of an impossible thing, such as I can, there's no such thing, given the way physics works, there's no such thing as a rock so big you can't move it. And so I can easily prove that there is no such thing as a rock so big it can't move it, despite not being able to look at the entire universe to see, because the thing simply cannot exist. So again, it's the universal non-existence of a possible local particular. Okay. So yeah, and it is reasonable enough to say, like, I could not prove that there isn't a Bigfoot somewhere in the universe, because obviously I don't have the power to look everywhere in the universe. Okay, fair enough. This has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not God exists, though. Because God, of course, is the author of being. God is the non-contingent being upon which all contingent being is contingent. And so God, our relationship to God is much like the relationship of a book to its author. Not the printed book, but the actual the contents of the printed book. And I don't mean the dark, markings on the light colored page, as is normally done because ink is expensive. But rather, I mean the book, the actual content. So if you take like the play, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, written by William Shakespeare. There is this play, quite independent of any particular performance, and the play is also independent of any particular writing down of it, that exists as an idea. And this thing was written by William Shakespeare. Now, can you find William Shakespeare within the play? No, you can't. There is no word you can point to and say, aha, Shakespeare is here. And especially you can't say Shakespeare is here in a way he is not in the other words. Because, well, Shakespeare is outside of the play. The play is contingent upon Shakespeare, so Shakespeare's not inside of it. And moreover, this also, it's a profitable metaphor, Shakespeare is, in a sense, in every word of the play. If you look at the entire play, Shakespeare is suffused throughout the entire thing, but not in a localized fashion, not in a particular fashion. He is suffused in a general, non-local fashion. You can't say that Shakespeare is in one word more than another word, or one phrase more than another phrase. Shakespeare is the one who created this, the one who wrote this, and therefore its existence depends on him, so it partakes in his being, and every word of it partakes in his being, but none more than others. In like manner, and by the way, you can look at this either from the proof from contingency and necessity for God's existence, or the proof from change. I've gone over both in other videos. You can find them plenty of places. Just look for sources that actually understand these arguments, because there are people who don't. In particular, just a key thing when you look for a more in-depth explanation of this, the argument from contingency and necessity is not about a causal chain that goes backwards in time, but rather about our dependence in the moment for why we exist right now. And similarly, the argument from motion meaning, by the way, change, what we call in English motion these days is in older language, local motion. That is to say, the change of location, or location change, in the original word order. And so the argument from motion in that sense of change is how one moment becomes another moment. And so it's sideways to the two moments. It's not a chain back through previous moments, but rather about those moments right there, because the one moment does not contain the next moment in the sense of having the being there to give to it, because it's different, not the same, and not wholly contained in it. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but when you look these up, find some explanation that of these arguments that actually explains that part of it. A lot of them will get it wrong and like try to look retroactively in time. They've misunderstood the argument. And approximately, and when I say approximately, I mean basically all attempts to like debunk these arguments all misunderstand them and tend to take them as a causal sequence in time. That's not what's being described. Each moment exists not of its own power, but of some other power, and ultimately because of God's power is why they exist. And so, because a contingent thing can't contingent thing can pass being through it, but it can't be a source of beings sufficient unto itself, because it itself is contingent. And so that's a little bit different, because once Shakespeare creates the play that, and then shares it, the play continues to exist even after William Shakespeare dies, for example. And Shakespeare existed in time anyway. Shakespeare is not non-contingent. So, the metaphor does break down in a variety of ways, but the important part is that we depend in every moment for our existence on God. And so it doesn't make the least bit of sense to say, I don't have access to all the places in the universe, so I can't eliminate God, I can't rule out the gods, in one of them that I haven't happened to have looked in. That's stupid. That's just to completely misunderstand our relationship to God. Literally everything, depending upon God for its existence within, within time, because everything in time is contingent. The very nature of being able to change is evidence that you're contingent. Everything that you encounter is evidence for God. Everything that you encounter is contingent upon God. It is like Shakespeare in the play Hamlet. You're not going to find God by looking under a rock or up a tree. All you have to do is look at the rock or the tree, and you will have found God in both of those places. Not God in his totality, but rather God in his effect. That's how you know actually that God is available, and that's why really do have, if you want to be an atheist, the problem of proving this negative, because it is not a localized particular. It is a non-localized universal. Everything that is contingent, everything that is capable of not existing, everything that does not exist, everything, and by the way, something was really fascinating was pointed out to me by a commenter. It's not just in time. Like a lot of people point out, like, if there's a time in which the thing did not exist, you can tell that it's contingent. True. However, it is also the case that if there is a space in which the thing does not exist, you also know that it is contingent, because it is possible for the thing to not exist there. So, for example, my right hand is here, but it's not here, and so you can tell that it is not necessary that my right hand exists, because there is a place in which it is not existing. And therefore it is contingent, because otherwise it would be absolutely everywhere. Wouldn't even mean anything in this case. I mean, it's so ludicrously contingent, it wouldn't even mean anything for my hand to exist everywhere, because that would mean that it would have to also exist in the superposition of itself in different places, and would thus be in its own way. So it is really, really very contingent, and very obviously so, if you understand what the word contingent means. Anyway, point being, this is a thing, and it is really sad to see how badly this gets misunderstood, as if God is merely some sort of being in the world, as if God is just one more contingent thing that you're going to find. No, that's not it at all. And by the way, the something that just really contributes to that metaphor, by the way, just look in the metaphor of the author to God. Again, all metaphors will always break down when you're comparing things that are unlike each other, and a contingent thing is unlike a necessary thing. But that said, is just look at the story in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, "Let there be light." God is telling the story of us existing. God is our author. And so, I mean, it's part of why the metaphor comes to mind, but also just, good example of why it is such an apt metaphor. But, yeah. So overall, you can't prove a negative. Yes, you can. There's a narrow sense in which you can't, and it's utterly irrelevant. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.